This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer. Welcome to Washington. Authorities in southwestern Oregon are reporting at least 13 fatalities tonight from a shooting rampage at a community college. The shooter is also dead. Umpqua College is in Rosburg, about 180 miles south of Portland. Let's go live to Trace Gallagher in our West Coast newsroom for the very latest. Hi, Trace.
Hi, Brett. The shooting happened just after 10:30 West Coast time. 18-year-old Courtney Moore, a student inside Snyder Hall, which is where we believe the shooting was confined, says a bullet pierced a window, hitting her teacher, and then the shooter walked in saying, "State your religion," then apparently opened fire. The fire department reports all of the fatalities were inside the classroom, but some students report that some victims made it out and scrambled to other areas. Police arrived on scene minutes later, confronting the shooter, though at this hour it remains unclear where exactly he was in relation to the shooting scene. They exchanged gunfire. The shooter was killed. Oregon Governor Kate Brown confirms the shooter was a 20-year-old male, but the motive remains unclear. Although sometime prior to the shooting, someone anonymously posted a warning online that said, quoting, "Don't go to school tomorrow in the Northwest." It's unclear exactly who posted that comment. Authorities were asked about that, and they refused to talk about it. The death toll is also uncertain. The Oregon Attorney General says 13, but others have said it could range anywhere from 7. Canine units still on scene at the college, going car to car in the parking lot, checking for explosives. A warrant has now reportedly been secured for the shooter's home as police continue looking for more evidence. Here's a student who describes what she heard. Listen.
So then I looked out the window, and there was a couple girls running, like sprinting away from the building, and then I hear screaming after that first gunshot. And then I looked out and I saw the people running, and I said to the teacher, "We need to get out of here right now." And then we heard the second and third gunshots.
Moments ago, doctors at a nearby hospital say some victims are still in surgery at this hour. The extent of their injuries, unknown. The exact number of wounded is also fluctuating anywhere between 15 and 20. FBI, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms are still on scene. Families with students who attend Umpqua College are still trying to contact their loved ones. Brett.
Trace, and again, that's all we know about this shooter. What we heard in the 20s, we don't have any other information, right? The authorities are not releasing anything.
There's no information at all about the shooter except that he was a 20-year-old male. We don't even know exactly what happened outside the classroom. There were initial reports from the fire department that he was outside the classroom shooting in, and then, as we just talked about, there was that student who said he walked in the classroom saying, "State your religion," before he opened fire. As for motive, as for threat, we've got nothing at all. Brett, we haven't even gotten an exact death toll some 4 hours after the shooting, or an exact number of injuries and their extent. Different agencies have different numbers, so we've been kind of staying away from exact death tolls at this time, but anything about the shooter, anything about the motive, and the exact death toll at this hour remains very unclear. Brett.
Okay, Trace, we'll head back for any breaking details. We're also waiting for President Obama, who will make a statement in the White House briefing room in about 17 minutes. We will take you there live for President Obama commenting on this shooting. Now to the situation in Syria. Apparently the whole deconfliction thing is not taking right away. Despite assurances from President Obama's top diplomat promising dialogue about Russian forces bombing Syria, it appears Vladimir Putin is continuing to brazenly go after Syrian rebels with no concern about American repercussions. With Fox team coverage tonight, Kevin Cork's at the White House with the increasing sense of paralyzation and possibly humiliation that many are projecting upon President Obama. But we begin with correspondent Doug McKelway and the latest on the Russian attacks.
A day after the United States was surprised by Russian air attacks against Syrian rebels, confusion reigned over the scope of President Putin's latest gamble. Russia says its planes conducted more than 20 sorties and hit 4 ISIS targets overnight. But the Pentagon reported an entirely different result, saying there's no evidence Russian planes hit any ISIS targets.
They're not striking targets in areas that are controlled by ISIL. And that, in and of itself, is a concern for us. Sure. And we've noted that concern.
Reports from inside Syria suggest civilians were hit in some of the Russian attacks. Putin today denied it.
I would like to direct your attention to the fact that first first information that there were casualties among civilians were published before our planes took off.
Russian planes reportedly also targeted the Nusra Front, an al-Qaeda-aligned rebel group, as well as a camp of U.S.-backed rebels. Asked whether the U.S. would protect U.S.-backed rebels from Russian attacks, the Pentagon spokesman today was repeatedly evasive.
You're talking about a hypothetical situation. Again, hypothetical situations. I think you should take our answers right now as not wanting to venture into hypothetical situations.
But in March, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter indicated the U.S. had a duty to protect U.S.-backed rebels.
We will have some obligation to support them after they're trained.
Further adding to the U.S.'s dilemma, new Iranian ground troops have now arrived in Syria, apparently to supplement Russian air attacks. Their arrival comes 2 months after Iranian Quds Force Commander General Qasem Soleimani violated a UN travel ban to Moscow and sealed a secret joint Syria military plan with Putin. The Russian buildup of forces in Syria began just days after Soleimani's visit. The Iranian Quds Force now operates not just in Syria, but in Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. Critics say in the absence of U.S. leadership, Iran and Russia are conspiring to become the dominant players across the volatile Middle East.
Vladimir Putin is exploiting the fact that the President of the United States and the American leadership is not going to acknowledge malevolent intentions.
Putin's chief of staff today denied Russia has any intentions beyond Syria.
We are talking about Syria specifically, and we are not talking about the pursuit of some political goals or ambitions.
But today, Iraqi Prime Minister Abadi said he would welcome Russian airstrikes against ISIS in his country. Further evidence that Russia is filling the void once occupied by the United States. Brett?
Doug McElroy live at the Pentagon. Doug, thank you. The Obama administration is doing everything it can to spin the Russia situation as nothing more than a misunderstanding between friends. Many other foreign policy experts say it is a blatant sign of Vladimir Putin's contempt for an American leader he perceives as weak. Correspondent Kevin Corke has the latest tonight from the White House.
On a day when Russian aircraft took to the skies over Syria, half a world away in Washington, the White House was ramping up its criticism of Moscow.
This highlights the fundamental contradiction in Russia's strategy. They are supporting a regime that is either unwilling or unable to carry out strikes against ISIL, and they're supporting that regime by taking strikes in areas where ISIL forces are not likely operating.
But even as the administration's frustration with the Kremlin boiled over, it's the president's strategy for the region that's facing renewed criticism.
Here's what you're going to see in the next few weeks. The Russians will begin to fly combat missions in that region, not just targeting ISIS, but in order to prop up Assad.
That was GOP presidential candidate and Florida Senator Marco Rubio 2 weeks ago. His prediction not only came true, it's reflective of the feeling of many on Capitol Hill that the Obama doctrine is failing, and they point to instability in Syria as just the latest example.
3 years ago, President Obama's opponent suggested that Russia might be our chief geopolitical threat. President Obama's response was to chuckle and say the 1980s called and wanted their foreign policy back. Unfortunately, the 1930s are calling President Obama and they want their foreign policy back.
What's less certain is how the Pentagon plans to implement the president's broader strategy for the region, while the Kremlin is forming its own regional collective. Asked today if Russia planned to join the U.S. coalition to fight against ISIS, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov suggested they'll pass.
We cannot be part of a nation which operates without the Security Council mandate and without the request from one of the countries on whose territories they operate.
A shot across the bow at America's strategy to operate in Syria without the approval of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Meanwhile, at the UN today, the leader of America's strongest ally in the region, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, addressed the assembly. And while U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power was not there, called out to a video conference with President Obama, Netanyahu scolded world leaders for not standing up for his tiny nation, despite repeated threats of annihilation from Iran.
The response from nearly every one of the governments represented here has been absolutely nothing. Utter silence. Deafening silence.
A powerful declaration, and that steely glare lasted 45 seconds. It was quite a moment today in New York. Meanwhile, White House officials, Brett, refused to give themselves a letter grade on the success of their Mideast policy, though they did say they were disappointed despite some areas of progress.
Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. We'll be heading back to the White House in just a few minutes as President Obama issues a statement in the White House briefing room about that shooting in Roseburg, Oregon. Now to other news. The Afghan government says it has retaken the city of Kunduz. The Taliban, which captured that city with a surprise attack Monday, says its flag is still flying there. Afghan forces have been aided by U.S.-led coalition airstrikes and some soldiers. The escalation of the fighting in the Middle East comes as President Obama threatens to veto a defense funding bill that gives him the spending increases he has asked for. The House easily passed the $612 billion measure today. The president says, though, he will veto the measure because it busts spending caps imposed by sequestration. Still ahead, House Majority Leader and prospective House Speaker Kevin McCarthy back here in studio reacting to the uproar over his comments about Hillary Clinton at the Benghazi Select Committee.
Been a setback, yes, because I do not want to make that harm Benghazi Committee in any way because it's not political.
Special report exclusive coming up a bit later when we return. The latest on the Clinton scandal and how Bernie Sanders is sneaking up on her in the fundraising game. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. In fact, a lot of them are covering the same story. This is a live look at Miami from our affiliate WSVN. The big story there and a lot of places along the East Coast. Preparations for Hurricane Joaquin. The storm is now a Category 4 hurricane, very powerful. It's roaring through the eastern Bahamas. We will have a live report on where the storm is heading a bit later. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. Back here inside the Beltway again. You're looking live at the White House. President Obama will be making a statement on the Oregon Community College shooting shortly, and we'll bring it to you here live on Fox.